This is fantasy like you've never read before. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. So today I wanted to share a review / my ideas about the FARSEER Trilogy by Robin Hobb. Now, the FARSEER Trilogy is the first 3 books of the Realm of the Elderling series, which is 16 books long, and it does stand on its own, though the story is continued in subsequent books. Now, my little teaser was that this is a fantasy like you've never read before, and in some ways that's true. In other ways, that may be a little bit of an exaggeration. Before I go on, though, I'll say there won't be any real spoilers in this review or this discussion. I think maybe the first chapter of the first book I might have to spoil just a little bit, some of the bigger ideas. But I think most of that is spoiled in the jacket copy anyway. So it's not anything big. But other than that, it'll be spoiler free. So this is like other fantasies you've read, insofar as it is a traditional fantasy or an epic fantasy. And the setting is one you will be familiar with, kind of like medieval Europe. At least that's how it feels to me. Robin Hobb did base it, at least geographically, on Alaska and the Northwest US, which is where she was living. So geographically it's based in that region, but the feeling of it, the vibes, is like a medieval Europe kind of vibes. And the fantasy is about court intrigue and about politics and about what it means to live in a kingdom and what kind of scheming and intrigue happens within a royal court, right, within this kingdom. And there's also magic in the world. There are 2 important types of magic. One's called the wit, and this is almost a more earthly feeling magic. This is something you're born with, but it is repressed. People don't talk about it, and it is a relationship to animals, essentially, and it is an ability to have kind of a psychological and emotional connection to animals that is incredibly deep and important for those that practice it, but it's frowned upon on society. People believe that if you practice the wit, or if you're witted, as they say, then you're more animal than human. So it is something that is looked down upon. But that is one type of magic, and it's just accepted that it exists in the world. And the other type of magic is called the skill, and this is a type of telepathy, and it is especially strong in certain family lineages, especially the royal lineage, but other people can learn it and practice it as well. You just have to have a little bit of a gift for it. And so these tropes, this environment is typical, right, for a secondary world fantasy that is an epic or traditional fantasy. You can even see some little hints of the Arthurian legend mixing in here and there, and there is a quest, I suppose you could say, that doesn't really come into the 3rd book. The first 2 books aren't very quest-oriented, they're more slice of life, but there is even a quest if you look at the bigger picture of the 3 books together. So in that way, this is like other fantasies you've read. And in fact, the first book, The Assassin's Apprentice, was published in 1995, which is 1 year before Game of Thrones. And Game of Thrones and Assassin's Apprentice have many similarities in terms of their content, their world, what's happening. But why this trilogy is different, why this is different than any fantasy you've read, is because it is written from a first-person point of view, which is uncommon in fantasy literature in general. It's not unheard of, but it's uncommon. Not only is it written from this first-person point of view, but it is a very intimate, introspective first person, almost a confessional first person point of view. And so the story is written in a retrospective style. So the main character, Fitz, as an adult, as an old man or an adult, you don't really know, he has been tasked to write a history of the 6 duchies. That's the kingdom that he grew up in. And so every chapter begins with a small epigraph of him working on this history, and then that leads him to kind of wander in his thoughts. And as he wanders and reminisces about his life, that's how we get the story of his life. And so because of that, the story itself is chock full of his sentimentality and his experience of what life was like. Now, Fitz is a royal bastard, and the story starts when he's 6 years old, and his grandfather, his maternal grandfather, drops him off, not at the palace, but the prince, his father, and a big royal entourage is engaging in some trade negotiations with a nearby country, and they've set up camp there, and his maternal grandfather brings him and leaves him there, and says, "We're too poor to keep feeding another mouth. He's yours. You take him." And that is his first memory of being abandoned by his grandfather, not remembering his mother or his mother's face. The only memory he has of his mother is of hearing a woman crying behind him as his grandfather pushes him through the gates of this encampment. So Fitz is accepted into the palace, into the kingdom, and recognized as a bastard right away. And the king is named King Shrewd, and he has 3 sons from 2 different queens. So the first 2 sons are Chivalry, who is the one who is heir apparent, and that's Fitz's father. And then the second son is Verity. And then from a different queen, so their mother died, and the king married a new queen. And then you have Prince Regal. So those are the 3 princes. And when Fitz comes in, he is immediately looked upon as a burden. And so his whole self-understanding is of being a burden. what it means to be an outcast, what it means to be separate from everyone else, what it means to be unloved, unwanted, and in the way. And now his father, Chivalry, who is next in line to the throne, is probably the most righteous man in the whole kingdom. And because he has a bastard, which he is so ashamed of, he gives up his right to rule. He gives up his place in line, and he goes to his wife's province to live out his days there, leaving Fitz behind in the castle, in the kingdom, right? So now Fitz has been abandoned by his mother and his maternal grandfather, and he finally has come to the kingdom, to the palace, and now he's been abandoned by his father as well. So who takes him in? Well, he is raised mostly by Berwick, who is the stable master, who is deeply devoted to chivalry, and then eventually he gets recruited to be the royal assassin, which is why this first book is called The Assassin's Apprentice. And so the current royal assassin, Shade, kind of also takes him under his wing. So that is who our main character is. And so to some extent, the story is a slice of life of what it means to be him. And now the story, I said, is very confessional. That's one of the things that makes it stand out among other fantasies. And a big part of that is because he doesn't fit in, but not only does he not fit in, he feels like he is a burden. So he has internalized everything that has been told to him about him, right? Now you also find out very quickly that he is naturally gifted with the wit. He is witted, right? And he doesn't know what that means as a young boy. You know, when he's 6 years old, he dreams the dreams of the puppies that are sleeping near him. He doesn't understand what that means. He doesn't understand there's anything wrong with it. For him, it's natural. But when Berwick finds out about it, you also find out that Berwick has at least some familiarity with the wit. And Berwick right away says, stop. This is inhumane. You can't do this, you know. This is not respectable. It not only is it not princely, but it's not human. You have to stop right away. And so he develops this great shame about this part of him that is innate. This part of him that actually lets him have connection, that lets him feel loved, feel included. This part of him, he's told, is shameful. He has to excise it. He has to get rid of it. So this is a constant struggle. And then when he becomes the apprentice to the assassin, that's something he can't tell anyone. No one can know that you're the royal assassin. It has to be a secret. So he's given all this knowledge. He's given all these skills, all these techniques that he practices, but he can't tell anyone about it. And sure, the king knows, and the assassin Shade knows, but no one else knows about it. And he barely gets any confirmation that he's doing a good job. He has no control over his life, and he's constantly told that he's not good enough. And the one thing in his life that seems to give him a sense of belonging and care and personality, he's told is wrong, that he has to get rid of it. And so for that reason, there are many people who look at this story as a queer analogy, and they say that being witted is like being queer. And someone like Berwick has this internalized homophobia, and the society looking down upon those people who have the wit or who are witted is showing a homophobic society, telling you that this innate part of yourself, which is what you need to make you whole and complete, is actually what is wrong with you, and you should be ashamed of it. So not only are you not allowing yourself to reach your full potential, but that very thing that you need also makes you worse, right? It's something that you should despise about yourself. Whether or not this really is a queer analogy, I think that is one legitimate way to read the story. And regardless if you take that approach or not, the fact of him being imbued with the shame and of not knowing who he is, having an inability to recognize who he is as a person, because he wants to define himself by the people around him, but the people around him don't want him there. And so because of that, there's this sense of displacement, there's this sense of longing, of heartbreak throughout the story, because everything is written from his point of view. And now, as it is all memory and it is mixed with sentimentality, the beginning chapters, when he is still a young boy, you see it through the eyes of a young boy, which is limited necessarily. And it may be that others think about him differently than he perceives it. And as he gets older, he's able to realize that his immediate perception was limited because he was so young and because his experiences were so small. And so as he ages, his perception does widen, but he's still a young child playing an adult's game. Right? He's still training to be an assassin, and he's given, jobs to do as an assassin as a young child in the first book. And those jobs increase throughout the books. He is treated as an adult, but told that he is worthless by everyone around him, by society around him. And so this tonality, this mode of storytelling, having a retrospective adult narrator reminiscing about his life, but a life that seems to be filled with regret and longing and heartbreak, is an intimate way to look at this epic fantasy. And that is not something you see in a lot of fantasies. So that is the style, and that is the tone, and that is what I think really sets the Farseer trilogy apart from other types of epic fantasy. Now, the world building I think is exquisite. It's very slow moving. The world, you don't see much out of the six duchies as well as one neighboring kingdom, but you know there's a much bigger world. And even those six duchies, they're very slowly revealed, different parts of them. You only learn about the other duchies as Fitz visits them or when their representatives come to visit the main kingdom for some sort of political reason. So you learn about them a little bit at a time and you meet some characters from all of those different duchies, but it isn't something that is thrown in your face right away. The story and the world is iterative and it builds slowly out with Fitz at our center. Not one geographic place, but one character is the center of our world, and the world builds around him. So you have to figure the story starts when he's 6 years old. He doesn't have a big world. His world is really limited. And then as he gets older and he has more experiences and he's sent on these jobs as an assassin, then his world expands. And as his world expands and his experiences grow, then his perception of the world also expands. So we get to experience that with him as he grows and matures, which is a really beautiful part of the story as well. But the world itself, I think, is expansive. It's beautiful. It takes its time being built out. It isn't anything too uncommon. Like I said, it is a somewhat familiar setting for epic fantasy, but it works really well, especially the way I think the world is revealed through Fitz's experiences of the world. The characters outside of Fitz, I think, this is where Robin Hobb really shines, is her commitment to character. And so Fitz, obviously, is the central character, and everything is about his internalized experience. And yet, there are so many ancillary characters, some of whom he develops close relationships with, others whom he wants to develop a relationship with, but there's always some sort of distance, and then others yet who are always antagonistic towards him for no reason, or for reasons that he can't understand. And so there are a number of different ancillary characters, and none of them feel like they're mere placeholders. None of them feel like carbon copies or, cardboard cutouts of any way. Each of them feel entirely fleshed out. They feel realized. Now, some of them you don't know a lot about when you first meet them, but in the same way as the world and as Fitz himself grow and develop, those characters grow and develop as Fitz ages and he learns about them more and he spends more time with them. But what you get from all of the characters is a deep commitment to emotional depth. You see all of the ancillary characters struggling in some way or having competing emotions in some way, and you see that played out in how they interact with Fitz, which I think is really beautifully done. And so having incredibly deep and well-crafted characters that have emotional lives that feel genuine, that feel real, and emotional lives that develop and grow along with our main character, that I think is one of the highlights of Robin Hobb's writing. As I mentioned, this trilogy is the first in a much larger series called The Realm of the Elderlings, which is 16 books long, but that is split into 5 story arcs. And the first one is the FARSEER Trilogy, and it's the story of this first-person narrative of Fitz. Now, those of us who didn't come to The Realm of the Elderlings until after its publication was completed in 2017, we know, for better or worse, that the first, the third, and the fifth stories of those 5 are all centered on Fitz, and they all are first-person narratives. Now, knowing that his story exists outside of the FARSEER Trilogy isn't really a spoiler, because we know right in the beginning of the first chapter that this is a retrospective story, that he is remembering his life, and so we know that he lives past the events of the story. And so his story continues in this great saga. But these first 3 books do stand on their own. You don't have to read anything else in the series to feel like you have a complete story within these 3 books. Now, as I mentioned, the third book has a sense of a quest, but the first 2 books don't. The first 2 books they have narrative and they move, but it is more like a slice of life, following this young boy and then this young man as he deals with what it means to be a bastard in the court, a bastard whose father has abandoned him, but who still is considered helpful and dear to the king and to the royal assassin, and is actually quite skilled, not just in the wit, which no one knows about, but also quite skilled in that he's quite intelligent. He learns to read and write really quickly, and he's good at many, many other things. He's good at sword fighting, and all the skills you would expect of a royal prince, he actually can do them really well. But because of his station of being a bastard and of being unwanted, the name Fitz itself means unwanted. It is an insult that people called him when he was young, and he just adopted it as a name to kind of, on one hand, to embrace his role as an outsider, but in the other hand, you can see anyone from a marginalized community taking on the terms that are thrown against them as a way to create a barrier against the pain they constantly feel when they are attacked in some way. So he takes the name Fitz as a way to say, you can't hurt me with this, because I'm already going to hurt myself with this as much as I can. There's a slice of life vibe especially to the first two books, where he is going along for the ride. He's told what to do, he's told where to go, and he just kind of does his best in situations that are always over his head. And even when you have this quest narrative coming in by the time of the third story, he still has this role of assassin, right? This role that no one knows about except for the king. He can't ever get glory. He can't ever have anyone know his name. The whole point of being an assassin is that no one knows who you are, that you're invisible. So he exists in a place that's neither here nor there. He can't be someone that is hated or someone that's loved. He has to be someone that is unknown. Being unknown, being invisible is the superpower he needs to cultivate to be good at his job as assassin. So even though he's going on a quest, which you figure out what that is, by the end of the second novel, you know what quest he's going to go on. And then the whole third novel is him kind of planning for it and figuring out what that means and then going on it to some extent. Whether or not he's successful in that quest, you know that that quest isn't about him. There's nothing about that quest that's going to give him fame and glory and riches. He is never going to receive the love that he wants. He's never going to receive the attention that he so desperately needs, that has been denied to him his whole life. His first memory is of being given away and of hearing his mother cry in the background. That is his first memory. That is the cornerstone of this trilogy, is a young boy being given away because he isn't wanted, and then being given to a place, and the one person who might embrace him also abandons him. So this story is built on that heartbreak, and yet the story is heartwarming as well. That is what is the magic of this story. Robin Hobb manages this balance between heartwarming and heartbreaking, which is really magical, really, really special. Now, some of the complaints about the story. The first one is that it is too slow. That is the big complaint people have. And I agree that it is deliberate, I'd say. It's not fast moving. It is slow paced. I don't think that is accidental. I think it is very, very intentional. And if you read the Live Ship Traders, which is the next trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings, it goes to show that Robin Hobb can write things with entirely different styles and much different pacing. So this is a deliberate choice to make this trilogy move at the pace it moves. It's the pace of a young boy learning who he is. It's the pace of someone who doesn't know who or how or where they are and is just trying to fit in. A world that is slowly expanding as the 6-year-old matures into a young man. That's the pace of this story. There aren't any epic battle scenes. There isn't a huge war being fought. Now there is, this whole storyline that there are these pirate-like people who keep raiding the coasts of the 6 duchies and are causing havoc and destruction and mayhem. And so the king and Prince Verity, who is kind of stepped up because he's now the prince, the heir apparent, has to figure out what to do, right? About these raiders who are just destroying the coastline and causing such awful mayhem. So that's happening on one side, but then you have these internal politics where there are people who are looking at how old the king is and knowing that there's going to be a succession soon. And now that chivalry is out of the picture because he has taken himself out of line of inheritance and there's only Verity there. And Verity never wanted to be king. He wanted to support his brother's chivalry, but now he's the next in line to be king. There is internal politics as well happening. So you have these two things happening, these internal struggle between different members of the court, and then you have the external struggle of these raiders who are destroying the coastal communities of the 6 duchies. So while those are happening, Fitz is just trying to live his life and understand who he is. That is the pace this story happens at. It's but the day-to-day operations of this kingdom, desperately trying to take these 6 different provinces and hold them together, not through force, not through violence, but through being a good king, being a proper politician who cares about all his subjects, which is a hard thing to do in this world, in this environment. So it's not a fast-paced story. It is slow-paced, but it is intentional. It is deliberate. It is gentle in that way. So that is one complaint about it, and I will concede that it isn't fast-paced, but I don't think it's accidental, and I think that is one of the appealing parts about it, and something that sets it apart from other fantasy stories, that it takes its time, and the pace increases as our character's experience increases. Right? Since we're growing up with Fitz and with this young man. And then the other complaint is that the main antagonist, who you recognize as the antagonist by the end of the first novel, and then throughout the second novel, and definitely in the third novel. I won't say who it is. You can probably guess because these stories follow a pattern. But that main antagonist, he seems like almost mustache twirling in his villainy. And the way others engage with him, it almost feels sycophantic, that people are too busy caring about the rules than they are about how he is breaking the rules. And so they're not taking the appropriate steps to protect themselves because they're so caught up in custom and tradition. And that he crosses a line into being a cartoon character too quickly. That is kind of the complaint. I guess my position is, I think Hobb does a good job of letting Fitz sympathize with that villain to show how that villain became who he is and some of the factors in that villain's life that caused them to develop into the almost cartoonish character that they are. I do agree that they're somewhat extreme, but at the same time, you have to remember this is all from the unreliable narrator point of view of this one person, right? This isn't a third-person omniscient narrator who is telling us what's going on in this kingdom. This is Fitz telling us his experience of what's going on. And so once you realize everything is grounded in this very specific perspective, then understanding that the antagonist's arc makes sense. And even then, he isn't treated as if he's just some buffoon or some cartoon character. He is treated as someone who has developed into that because of all of these extenuating circumstances. So for me, that works. I don't think it is over the top. I think it makes sense, considering everything is told from the perspective of one character and what he shares about the antagonist. Now, I will say that there are numerous places throughout the novel where you just want characters to kind of nip this in the bud. You say, look, this is clearly going to be a problem. Who cares about decorum? Who cares about tradition? Who cares about the way things are supposed to be? Just do what you need to do to make this not be a problem, because everyone can see this is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And they don't do that because they stick to what is expected of them due to decorum, due to the expectations of court or the traditions of court. And so that's frustrating. I agree. But it also is part of the story, right? It's not accidental. It's not like these characters are dumb. It's that these characters are trying to play the game. And I think, especially for me now, reading this in 2024, 2025, when we look at the state of current politics, how there are certain people that are engaging in politics that don't care about the game. They care about breaking things. They care about taking control for themselves. They're not playing by any other rules. And then the other politicians who are trying to defeat them are still playing by the rules. They're trying to say that the only way we can succeed is if we play within the rules. These rules that you're ignoring entirely. And that doesn't seem particularly effective. And yet there are still many good-hearted, well-intentioned politicians who insist on playing by rules that have been totally cast aside by the opposing politicians, right? That is something we see in our current day right now in contemporary politics. So it isn't surprising to me. It doesn't feel unrealistic that the people that know this antagonist is trying to accumulate power and is going to be a bigger problem in the future, that they know that, and yet they aren't doing anything about it because they don't want to take any explicit steps that go out of line of what the rule book says they should do, because they have such faith and conviction that the rules, whatever they may be, tradition, whatever it is the right way to go about it. So it's frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating, but it's not accidental. It isn't people being ignorant. It is people trying to play a game that has changed and they haven't realized the game has changed yet. So that's part of the tragedy of this story, is that as a reader, as a contemporary reader, we can see the signs of this is going to go badly. Please do something. And all the characters are refusing to because they're sticking by their code of honor, or what they believe to be a code of honor. And as a result of that, things get worse. Right? And all of a sudden, the situation comes to a head where you have to act in a way that you never would have imagined having to act in the first place. So that is a complaint people have. But for me, I think it makes sense. I think that it, again, is intentional, and it feels like what these people would do. Because honor is so important, right, to this royal court. Especially Prince Verity, who is the one kind of making a lot of decisions, along with Shade, the assassin. The honor that is imbued upon the royal name is so important to them, and the tradition of the royal name and the royal family, the FARSEER lineage, is so important to them that, of course, they're going to try to do everything they can to play the game following those old rules, even if those old rules aren't working anymore. So those are kind of the main complaints I've heard, that the story is really slow, that the world building is really slow, that the main antagonist is over the top, and that all of the problems could have been nipped in the bud really early if the characters just used common sense. And I can see where all those complaints come from, but I think that every decision Hobb makes is intentional in this story, in this trilogy, and none of those complaints ring true to my experience of reading these novels. So, just to sum it up, this is a high or an epic fantasy that in many ways resembles many fantasies you've seen or read before, but in other ways it is entirely different than any fantasy you read. It is intimate, it is introspective, it is confessional, it cares about emotion, and it is focused on character, and the world and the other characters build and are developed through the experience of one character. That's a journey we get to go on as readers, as visitors of this world. So for me, it works really well. It is contemplative, it is emotional, it is philosophical, and you see this young man struggling, this powerful young man, this incredibly smart, talented, powerful young man, struggling because he's told he is worthless, because he's told that his gifts are shameful. So this is a fantasy journey built around a young man trying to undo that shame, trying to learn that his gifts really are gifts, and that his skills and his talent are enough, that he's worthy not only of his name of being a farseer, but he's worthy of being someone who deserves love, who deserves to be cared for, who deserves affection. These are all things that he doesn't believe he deserves. And it takes a fantastical journey in order for him to find out who he is. I think I will end my discussion there. There's more I could say about this trilogy, but I'm going to stop there. I don't want to get into any more spoilers, and I think I've kind of gushed enough. I really, really loved this trilogy, but I would love to know what you think about it. I would love to know what you think of any of the Realm of the Elderling series if you've read them. I've only started the second trilogy so far, the Live Ship Traders, so please don't give any spoilers from any of the rest of the series, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about Robin Hobb's writing in general, about the world of the Six Duchies, and about Fitz and his many, many journeys. This is a fantastic world that Robin Hobb created, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about it down in the comments. For now, though, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.